In the bustling market of Onitsha, where traders shouted their wares and coins changed hands faster than thoughts could form, there lived an egg seller named Adana, whose eggs were always perfect, always fresh, and always too good to be true. But when the village herbalist Eskuria's grandson cracked open one of her eggs and discovered something that should never exist inside a shell, he uncovered a deception so elaborate and so evil that it had been draining the life force from an entire community for 7 years without anyone noticing, until it was almost too late to stop the horror that had been hiding in plain sight. This is the story of the evil egg seller who fooled an entire village, a tale of greed, dark magic, and the terrible price people pay when they choose convenience over wisdom, when they stop asking questions because the answers might disturb their comfortable routines. They say that evil rarely announces itself with thunder and lightning, that darkness often wears a friendly smile and offers bargains that seem too good to refuse. And nowhere was this truth more evident than in the way Adana arrived in Onitsha on a morning that seemed blessed by all the gods, carrying a basket of eggs so beautiful they gleamed like polished ivory in the early sunlight. She was a small woman with a gentle voice and humble demeanor, claiming to be a widow from a distant village whose husband's death had left her with nothing but his chicken farm and a desperate need to feed her 3 children. The village elders, moved by compassion and impressed by the quality of her eggs, gave her a prime spot in the market near the main entrance, where everyone would pass her stall on their way to conduct business. Within days, Adana had become the most popular egg seller in Onitsha, her products flying off the shelves faster than she could restock them, her prices slightly lower than competitors, which she explained away as necessity born from desperation. Her smile warm and genuine as she thanked each customer and blessed them with prayers for prosperity and long life. But there were strange things about Adana's eggs that people noticed without really seeing, small details that their minds dismissed because acknowledging them would have required uncomfortable questions and disrupted the convenient routine they had come to depend on. Her eggs were always perfect, never a single crack or blemish. Never a bad egg in any dozen. Never any variation in size or color, as though they had been manufactured rather than laid by living chickens. Her supply was inexhaustible, no matter how many dozens she sold each day. Her basket always full the next morning, despite her claims of having only a small farm with limited chickens. She never aged, remaining exactly the same over 7 years, while everyone around her grew older and grayer, her skin always smooth, her energy always boundless, her appearance frozen in time like a painting that refused to acknowledge the passage of years. Most disturbing of all, though nobody quite recognized this pattern until much later, the villagers who bought Adana's eggs regularly began to change in subtle ways. They grew tired more easily, their skin lost its healthy glow, their eyes dimmed as though some inner light was being slowly extinguished, the vitality draining away so gradually that they attributed it to age or stress or the natural wearing down of life, rather than recognizing it as theft of something fundamental to their existence. Obina was 10 years old when he first became suspicious of Adana, though suspicious is too strong a word for the vague unease he felt whenever he accompanied his grandmother to her egg stall. His grandfather was the village herbalist, a man who had taught him to see beyond surfaces, to notice patterns others missed, to understand that the world operated on principles deeper than most people cared to acknowledge. Obina had inherited some of his grandfather's sight, that ability to perceive energies and connections invisible to ordinary vision, and something about Adana made his skin crawl in ways he could unexplain to adults who would dismiss his feelings as childish imagination. He noticed how her shadows seemed wrong, too dark and too solid, moving independently of her body in subtle ways that violated natural law. He observed how animals avoided her stall, how dogs would cross to the other side of the market rather than pass near her, how birds never landed on the roof above her head despite perching everywhere else. Most significantly, he watched customers who bought her eggs, noting how they seemed to dim slightly after each purchase, as though some invisible light within them was being gradually turned down week by week, month by month, year by year, until they became shells of their former selves, alive, but not truly living, existing, but not thriving, moving through life like sleepwalkers who had forgotten what it meant to be awake. One evening, driven by curiosity that his grandfather encouraged and his parents found worrying, Obina convinced his grandmother to let him keep one of Adana's eggs for an experiment. He told her it was for school, a study of embryonic development, but his true purpose was far more serious and far more dangerous than childhood science projects. He took the egg to his grandfather's workshop, where herbs hung drying from rafters and mysterious bottles lined shelves that reached to the ceiling, where the old man practiced the ancient arts of healing and divination that had been passed down through their family for generations, stretching back to times when the boundaries between physical and spiritual worlds were thinner and more permeable than modern people believed possible. His grandfather examined the egg with instruments both mundane and mystical, using magnifying glasses and sacred stones, holding it up to candlelight and whispering prayers that had been old when his own grandfather first taught them to him. What they discovered when Obina finally cracked the egg open would haunt both of them for the rest of their lives and trigger a series of events that would shake Onitsha to its foundations and reveal the terrible truth about the friendly egg seller, who had been feeding on the village for 7 years. Inside the shell, instead of the golden yolk and clear white that should have been present in a normal egg, they found something that looked like condensed darkness, a substance that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, that moved with purpose as though alive and aware, that whispered in frequencies just below human hearing, carrying messages of hunger and consumption and endless feeding. Surrounding this dark core were threads like spider silk pulsing with energy that Obina's grandfather recognized immediately as stolen life force, the vitality and essence of living beings, compressed and preserved like honey in a jar, ready to be consumed by whoever had created these abominations. The old herbalist's face went pale as understanding crashed over him like a wave, as he realized what had been happening in his village for 7 years, while he and everyone else had been blind to the predator living among them. Adana was not a widow struggling to survive. She was a dark practitioner of the most forbidden arts, a life thief who had discovered a way to harvest vitality from unsuspecting victims by feeding them eggs that served as conduits and anchors, creating mystical connections that allowed her to slowly drain away their life force day by day, sustaining her own existence and maintaining her youth by consuming the years and energy of hundreds of villagers who thought they were simply buying breakfast. "We must tell the elders," Obina said, his voice shaking with fear and anger and the terrible knowledge that he had eaten these eggs himself, that his own life force had been slowly drained for years, that everyone he loved had been violated in ways they didn't understand. But his grandfather shook his head slowly, his ancient eyes reflecting wisdom earned through decades of navigating the dangerous spaces between human concerns and spiritual realities. "They will not believe us without proof they cannot deny, and gathering such proof will be dangerous because Adana will sense anyone investigating her with serious intent. She has clearly established powerful protections and warnings that alert her to threats, which is why she has operated undetected for so long. We must be clever and patient, must gather evidence and allies before confronting her directly, because a cornered dark practitioner is capable of terrible violence when threatened with exposure." And so began a secret investigation that would take weeks of careful observation and dangerous exploration, as grandfather and grandson worked to document Adana's crimes and discover the full extent of her dark operation that extended far beyond simple life theft into territories of magic so forbidden that merely knowing about them was considered dangerous to one's soul. They discovered that Adana's supposed farm did not exist at the location she had mentioned, that the land there had been abandoned for decades and contained nothing but ruins and wild vegetation that no chickens could possibly inhabit. They learned that she had appeared in at least 3 other villages before Onitsha, staying 7 years in each location before moving on, leaving behind communities mysteriously depleted and weakened, their populations suffering from ailments doctors couldn't explain and misfortunes that seemed to cluster unnaturally. They found records of similar egg sellers in other regions, operating under different names but matching Adana's description, suggesting either a network of practitioners sharing techniques or a single individual who had been pursuing this dark trade for far longer than any normal human lifespan should allow. Potentially centuries of feeding on unsuspecting communities that welcomed her as a humble vendor while she slowly devoured their collective vitality. Most disturbing of all, they realized that the 7-year cycle was not arbitrary but mystical, that after 7 years of feeding on a community, Adana would have harvested enough life force to extend her own existence by decades or perhaps even achieve something close to immortality if she could continue the cycle endlessly across generations and geography. But gathering evidence and understanding the scope of Adana's crimes was only the beginning, because the question remained: how do you stop a centuries-old dark practitioner who has spent lifetimes perfecting her art and protecting herself from discovery? Obina's grandfather consulted with other herbalists and spiritual practitioners from neighboring regions, reaching out through networks of knowledge that existed beneath the surface of ordinary village life, connecting those who understood that reality contained more layers than most people ever perceived. They learned that Adana's power came not from her own essence but from the stolen vitality she had accumulated, that she was essentially a parasite wearing human form, maintaining her existence through continuous feeding like a vampire, but more insidious because her victims never knew they were being drained and therefore never sought protection or fought back. Breaking her power would require severing the connections between her and all her victims, simultaneously destroying the eggs that served as mystical anchors and confronting her directly with enough spiritual force to overcome the tremendous power she had accumulated over decades or centuries of predation. The plan they devised was audacious and dangerous, requiring precise timing and the cooperation of dozens of people who would need to be convinced of Adana's true nature, despite 7 years of trusting her, despite the cognitive dissonance of learning that a familiar friendly face had been slowly killing them all. Obina's grandfather called a secret meeting of the village elders and influential families, presenting his evidence with the authority of his position and reputation, showing them the dark eggs and explaining their function, demonstrating how the energy threads connected to people who had consumed Adana's products. The reaction was predictably mixed, with some believing immediately, while others demanded more proof. Some horrified by the implications, while others insisted there must be reasonable explanations that did unrequire accepting the existence of dark magic and life. But ultimately faced with physical evidence they could see and touch, confronted by the undeniable reality that their community had been declining mysteriously for 7 years, they agreed to act to participate in a coordinated ritual that would sever Adana's connections and expose her true nature to the entire village in ways that could not be denied or dismissed. The confrontation took place on market day, when the entire village would be present to witness what happened. When Adana would be at her stall, surrounded by customers and unable to flee or hide, Obina's grandfather led a procession of elders and herbalists to her location, carrying sacred objects and chanting prayers that had been designed specifically to disrupt dark magic and protect the innocent from spiritual backlash. Adana recognized the threat immediately, her friendly mask slipping to reveal something ancient and alien beneath, her eyes blazing with rage and fear as she realized her carefully maintained deception was collapsing. She tried to flee, but the elders had prepared for this, surrounding a stall with a circle of salt and sacred herbs that prevented spiritual entities from crossing, trapping her inside a boundary she could not breach through magic or physical force. "You have been stealing from this village," the old herbalist declared, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent market where hundreds of people had stopped their transactions to watch the drama unfold. "You have been feeding on our life force for 7 years, slowly killing us while wearing a mask of friendship and humility. Today your crimes end, and justice will be served according to the old laws that govern both human and spiritual conduct." What happened next would be spoken of in Onitsha for generations, becoming legend and cautionary tale and proof that the old ways still held power when properly invoked by those who remembered. Adana transformed before their eyes, her carefully maintained human appearance dissolving like mist in sunlight, revealing her true nature as something that had never been fully human, or had stopped being human so long ago that nothing remained of whatever she might once have been. She was a being made of hunger and darkness, a predatory spirit that had learned to take physical form and sustain itself through consumption, of life energy existing solely to feed and expand, and continue existing regardless of the cost to others. The elders performed the ritual of severance, breaking the mystical connections between Adana and all her victims, destroying every egg in her basket and throughout the village, releasing the stolen life force back to its rightful owners in a wave of energy that people felt as warmth and vitality and sudden clarity, as though waking from a dream they had unrealized they were trapped in. The effect was immediate and dramatic, with people gasping as color returned to their faces as energy flooded back into bodies that had been slowly failing as years of artificial aging reversed partially, and spirits rekindled with a fire that had been stolen from them. Adana, stripped of her stolen power and exposed in her true form, could not survive without the constant feeding that had sustained her for centuries. She began to age rapidly, decades compressing into seconds, her form withering and collapsing as the weight of her true years finally caught up to her without the buffer of stolen vitality to protect her from time-esque passage. She screamed curses and threats, promising vengeance from beyond death, swearing that others of her kind would come seeking retribution. But her words grew fainter as her form dissolved like smoke in wind, until finally nothing remained but ashes and the memory of her crimes and the terrible knowledge that such creatures existed in the world, preying on the innocent and the trusting, hiding behind masks of normalcy while feeding on human vitality like parasites that had learned to counterfeit humanity. The market erupted in confused noise as people processed what they had witnessed, as those who had been feeding on Adana's eggs 4 years realized how close they had come to being drained completely, as parents held children and gave thanks to ancestors and gods that the threat had been discovered before reaching its final conclusion. In the weeks and months that followed, Onitsha slowly recovered from 7 years of hidden predation. But the village was forever changed by the knowledge that evil could wear friendly faces and that the most dangerous threats often came disguised as convenient solutions to everyday problems. The elders instituted new protections and protocols, teaching the community how to recognize signs of dark magic and spiritual predation, encouraging people to trust their instincts when something felt wrong, even if it appeared beneficial on the surface. Obina, honored as the child whose curiosity and courage had saved the village, continued his training with his grandfather, learning the arts that would allow him to protect his community from similar threats in the future, understanding that vigilance and wisdom were eternal necessities in a world where darkness constantly sought new ways to feed on light. The spot where Adana's stall had stood remained empty, marked with protective symbols and serving as a reminder to future generations that convenience without questions is invitation to deception, that trust without verification is vulnerability waiting to be exploited, and that the price of safety is eternal vigilance against those who would prey upon the innocent under masks of friendship and false humility. This is a story of the evil egg seller who fooled an entire village for 7 years, a cautionary tale about the dangers of accepting surface appearances without questioning deeper truths, about the importance of listening to instincts and observations that something is wrong even when rational explanations seem sufficient, about the reality that darkness exists in the world wearing many disguises and that only vigilance and wisdom and courage can protect communities from those who would exploit trust for their own parasitic purposes. The next time you encounter bargains that seem too good to be true, the next time you meet someone whose perfection seems slightly unnatural, the next time you feel that vague unease about someone everyone else trusts completely, remember Adana and the eggs that served as conduits for life theft, and understand that evil rarely announces itself honestly, but instead wears the masks we most want to see, offering us exactly what we desire while slowly consuming everything that makes us truly alive. This is the wisdom of the ancestors, the lesson learned through terrible experience and preserved in stories that teach without preaching, that warn without terrorizing, that prepare the next generation to recognize dangers their elders failed to see until almost too late. May those who hear this tale remember its lessons and teach them to their children, ensuring that no community ever again welcomes a predator simply because she offers convenience and smiles while slowly draining away the life force that makes existence worth living.